Close your eyes or focus on a distant
This is our live weekly Cosmic Conversation.
Overgrown Beard Edition.
We are kicking off a week about Karlheinz Stockhausen. We're kind of in a tunnel today of the world of Stockhausen. So.
And what a vast, lengthy, amphetamine-infused world it was.
Why do you say that?
And it just seems like he had to have
Oh, because he worked so hard and so much. I did say he described his schedule as, and this is later in life, so I don't know if this is always how it was, because I know he was traveling quite a bit in his younger years. But at one point he said his schedule was from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. he would work on music. And then from
he was older, I think, when he said that.
Yes, but this probably was just his schedule always, because he described, most of his life this way. From 3 p.m. to 7 p.m. he would work on music. And then from 8 to 10 p.m. he would work on music. So 3 and 4 is 7, that's 9 hours a day working on music. And, not too much detail there in what he's actually doing. But at one point he did say when he was really only working in his electronic music studio, he would spend most of the day, working on the music. And then at night he would work on the pre-composition. So basically sketching out what he was going to work on the next day. Because that's a lot of, it's a little more technical. It's not really just composition and having, people come in and play the parts. He's having to, do the setup of what is even going to be recorded and then
one of the common themes I've noticed with early electronic music specifically is that people tend to have a blueprint for what they want to design.
Yes.
Because it was such a painstaking process back then, when you're dealing with tape machines and more primitive sound sources. I think you really had to kind of map out an idea of the sound you wanted to create, for your next session in order to be productive.
If you were going to be productive, yeah, especially if you were working on something that was commissioned or something that had a deadline in terms of like you were going to do a performance somewhere of this piece. You definitely had to be very strict. He had the benefit of working out of the West German radio electronic music studio. It was the West German radio that he worked at, but then they built an electronic music studio. And he was the head of that. He was the director of the West German radio or electronic music studio within the radio station.
In Cologne?
In Cologne, similar to the BBC and also the Paris studios of Pierre Schaeffer. Very, very similar to Pierre Schaeffer. He even said that he went to Paris for a while and he spent some time there in the Musique Concrète studio. And when he came back to Germany, he decided he was not going to make anything electroacoustically. He was only going to make synthesized sound.
Was he at GRM?
Yes. So he spent time there. He learned their techniques. He learned, what was going on. I think he pretty much went everywhere in the world that there was an electronic music studio. And he decided he was only going to make music from sound that he synthesized. So that was from tone generators, from his test equipment, from things he built, from taking, things he built, recording those sounds and manipulating them. So not necessarily...
This was an era that he went through, right?
He says that's pretty much it, from that point on. This is from, I want to say 1953.
Oh, wow. So what are the, for instance, in his piece, Contact, what sounds like a piano? That's
probably, so there's a couple versions of Contact in the little research that I've done. We're not experts, we're just here to have a conversation about Stockhausen because, you can get pretty academic about things. You can look at him from just the standpoint of being a composer and analyzing his compositions, or you can look at it from, his experimental side and his innovations. There's a lot of points of entry here. But Contact has multiple versions. There's a version that is just the electronic sounds. There's a version that's the electronic sounds and composition. And then there's a third version, and I'll have to look it up, but it has something else going on as well. So we learned, did a premiere of Contact. This is probably his most famous work. He did that from 1958 to 1960. He created that. And then he toured it. He premiered it in San Francisco.
He lived there though, right?
Yeah, he was living in San Francisco, and I don't know exactly, the time period, how long he was there.
Sausalito, I believe.
Yeah, he was there in 1967 to premiere Contact in San Francisco.
Which is north, like North Bay, north of the
a very
city.
beautiful place to be. That would be well after BB and Louis Barron were living there. But, San Francisco in 1967, I can only imagine what he was getting into and the kinds of people he was interacting with, if at all. So that's a pretty interesting
I wonder if
crossroads.
he met George Harrison there or something like.
Yeah, I mean, he definitely spent a lot of time in London too. So that's where he got connected with the Beatles. I mean, he did lectures. They were connected to him. I don't know that he really gave a hoot about them very much. But he did say that he went and visited the EMS studios. So he met Peter Zinoviev, and Peter Zinoviev sold him a system. So he brought an EMS 100 series to,
he had a 100 series.
To the studio, because one of his duties, he said, as the director of the West German radio station, or West German radio electronic music studio, was to decide what equipment they would use, and then kind of working with all the engineers on what the equipment did and how to use it.
So he was like the equipment buyer.
So he brought in the EMS system.
Okay. Analog Solutions out of the UK is actually reissuing something inspired by the System 100 Delaware, system. It's not exact, but we'll chalk a link up there.
Yeah.
It's insane. It's like a huge, like desk system, just as big, as you would expect from something like that, but it's but it's modern.
The 100 system is massive, right?
Yeah, it's the big one that you see in a lot of the Radiophonic Workshop videos. It was called the Delaware.
So
and it was capable of doing quite complex electronic compositional stuff, like it's a big sequencer, I think a couple sequencers, really massive beast. I think it was kind of like EMS's like way of being like, all right, this is all you could possibly ever need.
Yeah, and they were really at the forefront of getting the synthesizers into the radios and electronic music studios that were around Europe.
Europe, I was gonna say it was the key word is Europe. Like they were key in Europe.
But again, these were just at the big radio stations that had the electronic music studios in the 60s, as well as universities. So same kind of theme here. So I'd say what we've learned so far about Stockhausen really runs in parallel with what we learned about Pierre Schaeffer in the Paris Electronic Music Studio, and something that he even said in an interview that I was watching is that he is simply a product of his time. He wouldn't be who he was, inventing what he was doing, making the music he was doing, if he hadn't been born in the exact place and time that he was. And he's simply a product of it.
Well, at least he admits it.
Yeah, and it's something we've actually talked about a lot. Obviously, this club is about early electronic music in the 50s to the 70s. So if you were making music in the 50s to 70s with electronic music and you were on the cutting edge of this using magnetic tape and doing music concrete and things like that, you had to be born at a certain time. So it was interesting to hear him say that, because we've said that so much with all the people that we've covered, that's just what it is. If you're born now, you're not going to be on the cutting edge of early electronic music, or if you were born in Beethoven's time, you're going to be, innovating in that realm. But there is definitely a through line with anyone who was innovating in an avant-garde way with music. Kind of had a similar philosophy about, kind of breaking the norms of the time, and Stockhausen was definitely in that worldview.
One of the things that really caught my eye about his experience is that he was involved with the Expo 70, called the Space Music Expo 70. So it's very much in line with this group.
In Osaka. Okay, so he went to Japan. He went everywhere. He really got...
it was the German Pavilion.
Okay, gotcha.
at the Space Music Expo 70 in Osaka, Japan. So that was confusing. Sorry for the
So he
delay
went there to perform something similar to Pierre Schaeffer. He performed at one of those expos, and everybody was really mad. The audiences were not happy.
They were well. I feel like
there's not an audience for this at its time.
Right,
So he did everything very mathematically. He created languages, so he studied linguistics and things like this. And he was originally going to be a novelist. He wanted to be a writer. And apparently, he wrote a letter to a famous novelist at the time when he was trying to figure out what he should do with his life. And this author actually wrote him back. I'll have to look up who exactly that is, and said, you should do what is exactly uniquely you. Only pursue exactly what is unique about you. Don't do anything that anybody else has done before. So I think that kind of fueled him for the rest of his life to be so focused on being in his own head, in his own ideas, and just pursuing them to the fullest extent and not letting anything get in his way.
It makes a lot of sense.
And not really caring what anyone thought about it.
Nothing else really matters.
Kind of wish someone had said that to me when I was 18.
Yeah. Well, you know it now.
I know it now. It's never too late to learn.
Knowing is half the battle.
To follow your heart.
But yeah.
But he was also not to we try not to be too linear biographical because we can all read Wikipedia, but I got really excited learning about how cosmic Stockhausen was. How much he referred to things as being cosmic.
Oh, about how he was educated on the star Sirius?
I think it's a planet. He called it a planet, Sirius.
It was a star.
I thought it was a star, but I heard him say planet too. But anyway,
planet,
Sirius.
Star.
One of his compositions, one of the works he did was called Sirius as well. But he was basically saying that he's not from this world and that cosmic forces are really important and that music is like a cosmic tone that we're interpreting and experiencing. And one of his last works,
I agree with a lot of that though.
we call this the Cosmic Tape Music Club for a reason.
It's just vibration.
Yeah, one of his
it's up
last
to our ears
compositions
to how we perceive it.
Was called Cosmic Pulses. So
in
I'm
our
going to grab.
brains, I guess.
There's a little.
Ultimately.
There's an entire Wikipedia page just about Cosmic Pulses. His work from 2007. So because like I said, he's did over 300 compositions and
a lot of work.
Traveled
That's
the
what I meant
world.
by amphetamine.
And there's so much to dive into, but if we just focus on the cosmic stuff, we could probably do a whole hour on just that. So he was a weirdo.
I feel like
really
him
that about
and
him.
Sun Ra came from the same planet.
He did an opera that's 5 hours long that looks very much like a Sun Ra production.
Right.
And I was not expecting that. When I started doing the research for this conversation about Stockhausen, I was expecting to read a lot of really dry stuff about his mathematical approach to composition.
Serialism.
And, serialism and pointillism and how his notation systems that he developed. But I did not expect to find a cosmic opera in the mix. So that was really, really awesome.
Yeah, I didn't realize how
that made me really happy.
Space happy he was.
I guess, again, there's a reason why
Cosmic era.
we said, this group
Space
is really
age
about
era.
electronic music in the space age and how much those things are inextricable. You cannot separate the people from the time.
I get what
from
you're
the
saying
technology.
about the time frame playing such a
Can't.
huge
It was so important
role.
at the time. It was all anybody was talking about. It informed everyone, I think, at a very subconscious level, even in every art form.
Yeah, and
we can get technical or we can get cosmic. We lean to the cosmic.
It's interesting to me that once the space race in that space age era happened, you can't take that back. There may be another generation that happens. I don't know if we'll ever, get into, commercial, inhabiting of
Oh yeah, I don't think we'll live long enough to see people living
other
on Mars.
planets and things like that. So yeah, there's this chance that maybe there'll be another space age, in that regard. But there's never
Yeah,
going.
we'll never stop being in like a space obsessed society.
There
right?
will never be another time when that was all anyone was really thinking about.
He was very, very interested in not just sound, but sound in
Placement.
space.
Yes.
Sound in space.
Sound within
Not the kind of
environment.
space we were just talking about, but environmental space.
Which I would say, I would rate that high in terms of, that being,
That's probably one of his main contributions.
one of his main contributions, but I would say that is one of the hottest topics in audio
Right now?
right now. Yeah.
Again, there is so much information on Stockhausen, which is a blessing and a curse because it's a lot to go through and
a lot
figure
to
out
sift through.
what to talk about, but it also is a blessing because it's so much for us to discuss, which I actually also heard him say in an interview that he was like, I did enough work. You guys can spend the rest of eternity like analyzing it. I did it all. I'm not going to analyze it right now.
He's very confident.
You guys talk about it. Talk about me, keep my myth alive, analyze what I did. There's enough there to keep you busy for a lifetime, which is true.
And here we are.
So I think it's cool that, like we said, there's so many sides to Stockhausen. You can talk about him as the man, the myth, the legend, the superstar who was on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. We can talk about
He was on
him.
the cover of Sgt. Pepper's. Let's just take a second.
Who knew that? I didn't know that actually.
I didn't either.
Like I knew the Beatles were into him and everything, but I didn't know his face was one of the faces on there.
Crossover, but I did not know that he was literally. I mean, that's gonna send you into another oblivion.
Yeah, if you start looking into that.
In terms of I'm talking as like his in terms of his
ego. Yeah.
Yeah, like he was on that cover. You can't ever take that away from him. Like he was on, one of the best-selling records of all time. He was on the cover.
And one of the most like groundbreaking.
One of the most.
He's like the father of bringing experimental composition into the mainstream, into pop music.
Right.
And
no
so
one
many
could
people
deny him
reference
that based off of the fact that his head was, featured on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's.
Which I don't think he sort of knew about these things, but he didn't really care. He thought they were too repetitive and nobody was doing anything interesting. And he would like send them back letters that were like, you should listen to these pieces of mine and get a little more interesting.
Right. Yeah. He was trying to tell George Martin how to do his job, I'm sure.
But more recently, Bjork also talks about how he was a big influence for her because she studied music at a very young age. And she got really bored. Can you imagine Bjork being bored by listening to Bach and Beethoven and like begging her teachers to give her something more interesting? And so they gave her Stockhausen. And she ended up doing an interview with him.
In your opinion, what's the best era of Stockhausen compositions?
Oh, that's too hard to say. He made 300 compositions from 1951 until 2007.
I know. What's your favorite era?
I mean, look, I really dig his like 70s lecture era. He's got the long hair, he's very confident, he's done the Contact already, so he's kind of established himself.
He's speaking from this place of...
That he's like, all right, I've done this, I've established myself as a leader in this realm, the Beatles love me, I'm a rock star, like, I really vibe with that, but I also really love, he did a lot of interviews in his later life, like right before he died almost, and a lot of things that he was still working on until he died, that I felt like he was a little more able to talk freely about his work and his life and what he thought his legacy was, and he was a little cheeky, and I found him really entertaining. But I mean, you can't really talk about him without bringing up the Helicopter Quartet, so...
Yeah, no, that is amazing, actually. I really enjoyed that little anecdote.
So he wrote this quartet. So he was always pushing boundaries in terms of the kind of how he was making music, right? Like there's all these theories and ways and languages that he developed that we could go into. If people in the group know more about that, please pick up that baton. But also like space, the quadraphonic systems, the octaphonic systems, the where the speakers were placed in the room, how sound was coming at the audience, but then also the spaces. He did a bunch of work that was, you'd walk through this whole I think it was like the Beethoven Hall or something, where there was a bunch of different rooms, and each room had different people playing different instruments, doing different things, but it was all part of the same composition. So as you walked through the different concert halls,
your oral experience changed.
yeah, but what was so funny is that apparently the musicians hated it so much that they revolted and just played whatever they wanted. And they didn't actually play his piece, and it was like a total failure. But I thought that was amazing, that he drove them mad and they couldn't handle it. And so they ended up just in the moment on the day of the performance, just playing whatever they wanted.
Right. Oh.
I can't imagine as the audience member, because you don't know what you're expecting anyway.
I have half
think,
a mind
okay.
though, considering what I've read about him, and that, you know, he was really into this sort of like planned randomness.
That maybe he did that on purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Like maybe that was a compositional technique, you know, where like he
drive them mad to get them to improvise.
like he knew that they, you know, he created some. He was like, what if I, you know, compose something so ridiculous, and I'm such, you know, a jerk about and
I don't
demanding.
think he couldn't help but be demanding.
Loved that later interview that we saw where a guy was interviewing him, and his first question was, I mean, this is what he gets for asking this question right off the bat, but he was like, what is the most interesting, this is kind of why I did this to you, what is the most interesting sound that you've ever heard?
I should have picked up on that.
Or something like that, and he was like, no.
He was like, no, I can't tell you. I can't answer that.
He's like, he was like, could you tell us the most interesting sound you've ever, you know, heard or imagined? And he was like, no.
Let's see. We can talk a little bit about, you know, his upbringing and, you know, a little biographical stuff.
Oh, right.
But he was born in Germany, and his father was in the Nazi Party. And his mother was mentally ill. So when he was young, his mother was sent to a mental hospital. And when the Nazis took power, they did not think that mentally ill people were deserving of life. And she was sent to the gas chamber, though he was not made aware of this. He was told that, you know, everyone at the hospital got some kind of disease and they all died. But later, he did know. His father also went off to the Russian front of the war and was never heard from again. He was considered missing in action and then presumed dead. So he lost both of his parents at a young age, but his father did remarry. What I thought I heard, his housekeeper became his stepmother. And so he was, you know, like many of the people we've discussed from this time, very affected and traumatized by growing up in wartime and from what he experienced in his childhood. And, you know, a lot of people say he carried this through his life and never really got over it. And it made him the very strict, black and white thinking kind of person that he was. Though he was very creative and weird and cosmic and thought he was from another planet, his work ethic and his drive, you know, was very, you know, black and white, very strict, very rigid. But yeah, so he had a pretty, you know, hard time with, you know, losing his parents at a young age. And he began, I'd say the most influential character in his life is Olivier Messiaen, who he studied with in Paris. And like we said, he studied composition.
Was that who he was studying with when he met Pierre Schaeffer?
Must have been, yeah.
Okay.
Because there was also, yeah, a lot of the characters that were in Paris at the time that he was interacting with. But he had a very traditional, you know, musical training, because what else was there at the time? But he did go to university and did study composition and linguistics, and
I think that's an interesting pairing.
Yeah.
Linguistics.
Well, he wanted to be a writer, so that's in the mix too.
And music, but that's a pretty rare one. You know, you hear a lot of mathematics and music, you know, and it's been said that they go hand in hand. And But the linguistics aspect is very interesting.
And then he took his position at the West German Radio Electronic Music Studio that was newly formed, and eventually became the director of that. A lot of people say his music is not very emotional, but I think he was a pretty emotional person.
Which I had noticed, that was something I had mentioned about Daphne Oram, for example. Like, all of her compositions that are recorded sound like experiments that she thought of ahead of time. And she was basically just doing that sound experiment. That was a recorded, that ended up being one of her compositions.
This song is really just her.
And I feel like
with this
Stockhausen kind of did that from a written compositional standpoint. Like, he would just, the piece would be about a concept, like concept pieces, rather than them being about creating a lovely piece of music.
Yeah, and he says too, like, as he went through his life, he built on those ideas. And that's why he didn't really care about the pop music that he inspired, because he felt like it was repetitive and redundant. Like, he wanted people to continue to push their ideas forward, and each piece should be, developing into another idea. You shouldn't play with the same idea again. He had very deep ideas about consciousness and humanity and what we're all here for, and that music is like the most important healing power that we have. So I don't know how you could have those ideas and be that person and not have your music reflect that emotional power. So I think he just probably came across as very didactic and cold, and so people felt that way about his music because it wasn't fitting into any boxes, and it wasn't about, oh, let's get people to dance, or love songs or things like that. But he was making these really moving, powerful operas that people say who saw them that like nothing ever comes close to those experiences.
Wow.
So that's all we've got on Stockhausen for today. Everybody stay safe, stay healthy, reach out for connection, and stay creative, and we will talk to you soon.
Ta-ta.